We will start with introductions just to keep everyone on schedule, but there will be some other people trickling into the room as well. So welcome and thank you so much for attending this educational session with Therese Stadul on keeping it real, sharpening your storytelling skills. As your meeting moderator, I will introduce our presenter, establish guidelines, time the presentation, and ask for your evaluation of the presentation near the end of the session. To keep our meeting here today on time, here are some guidelines. During our presentation, your audio will be muted and the chat box will be disabled between participants. However, you can still chat with the hosts and co-hosts in the room for technical issues. There may be time for Q&A at the end. Please write down your questions in the chat box and please send them to me, Emily Sabo. On the participants list, during that Q&A session, there may be an opportunity to raise your hand and we will unmute you to address your question during the allocated Q&A time. Your continued attendance in this educational session will be deemed as implied consent to video and audio recording. I invite you to complete the evaluation form, which will be posted in the chat to provide feedback to our presenter. And now, more about our presenter. Therese Stadul has been a Toastmaster for 5 years. She is a member of both Word Warriors and the Fair Lawn Toastmasters clubs. Therese has an intensive storytelling background, including training with Jean Houston's Social Artistry program. That program was commissioned by the Director of Leadership and Capacity Development of the United Nations as a method of diversity training to be utilized worldwide. Therese has also earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in popular fiction writing at Seton Hall University in January of 2020. The goal of this session is to heighten your awareness of the importance of storytelling and present you with storytelling tools. Please welcome our presenter, Therese Stadul, keeping it real, sharpening your storytelling skills.
Thank you, Emily. Welcome. I hope you're all enjoying this conference. I'm so honored that you chose to sign up for this storytelling session. We can work together to develop stories to teach, entertain, and inspire our audiences. You may want to have a notebook and pen handy. First, we're going to define storytelling. Then we'll go over some storytelling basics. I'll tell a story, and then as a group, we'll review the story to make sure that it met the criteria that I've presented. So I'm going to share my screen. Keeping it real. What is a story? I would like to get the audience's, the listeners' idea of what is a story. So if you would use your reaction feature and raise your hand, and our moderator will call on one or two of you to sort of give us an idea of what you think story is.
Annette?
I think we were born instinctively to want to know stories. I think they're a part of our bloodstream in our creation.
Thank you, Annette. Anyone else?
Patricia?
Hi there. I think stories kind of at times are histories. It's a story of who we are, and sometimes it gets elaborated and sometimes it's simple, but stories are stories of us, are histories of us.
Thank you, Patricia. And one more.
Susan?
I think stories are how we connect with one another.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I've done a lot of research besides the studying that I've done, and I thought this was a great definition of story. Story is a character in pursuit of a goal, facing a challenge or obstacle. How the character resolves a challenge drives the narrative. Stories are and always have been intrinsic to our basic human survival. When I think about stories, I think about stories that entertain. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. So I think about loving to read novels, loving to watch movies. But stories are so much more than just entertainment. Stories are magic. First, stories help us to teach. Imagine, if you will, the early civilization who lived in caves. They had to fight the wild beasts for their very survival. I'm pretty certain that they told their children stories about the frightening mountain lions and the grizzly bears that lived right around the corner. Stories about the grandfather who ventured out on his own around the mountain and had to be rescued after he was mauled by a lion. Did you see those scars that run down his back? And really, that's why he's missing his hand and his left foot. Stories can also help us in business. They explain profit and loss margins, and it's sort of boring when you just see dry facts and figures. So much better if you explain how those facts and figures relate to the business through story. Did you ever think that stories can help you with a job interview? You may wish to compile a list of stories to help you on your next interview. Stories when you had successes. Stories where there were obstacles. Don't think of it as weaknesses or failures. Think of it as obstacles that you overcame. Stories about your aspirations, and even stories about a time when you reached a goal and helped the business meet a deadline. So instead of saying, I'm dependable, offer a story about a time your dependable nature helped the business. Stories can also be used to sell a product, to motivate change, and to inspire an audience to take an action or look at an event in a different way. You may be wondering, how do I get started? Your own personal stories can be the greatest sort of background for your stories. If you're not already someone who keeps a journal, I would advise that you get one. If you have a life event where you were frightened or in fear, how did you overcome that fear? Write down all of the details. Think about your successes. I write a few long pages every day, and then I reflect on what happened the day before. That's the backbone of my story. And now we're going to get started on the R.E.A.L. So after we go over the meaning of R.E.A.L, I'll share an example story, and then we'll go back and review and see if my story met the bill. So the R.E.A.L stands for relevant. Besides the basic human needs of food, shelter, and clothing, we all have emotional needs. Dr. Benjamin this morning talked about our need for love, but we also have a need for acceptance, a sense of belonging, success, social approval, and freedom from pain, fear, and danger. We can tap into these basic human needs, emotional needs, and connect to our audience through story. The second part of relevant is, how does my story fit into the framework of the event that I'm speaking at? For our conference today, the theme is Empowering Diverse Voices, Every Voice Counts. I'd like you to determine whether or not the story I tell measures up on the conference theme, as well as if it's relatable on an emotional level for the audience. The last bullet point, is the story timely? Is it relatable to the here and now? Choose a story that somehow relates to the current time period. R.E. represents engaging. Whether we're teaching, inspiring, or moving someone to action, it's important that we keep the audience engaged. Many storytelling resources state that our brains release hormones when we connect with the story we're hearing. When a story presents a challenge, our brain releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And we get that flight or fight response. As the story continues and the crisis is resolved, our brains release oxytocin, which is a pleasure hormone. All of this brain activity makes us feel as though we're right in the middle of the action. It engages people's brains so that they have the hormone release. So our personal stories are sort of like flight simulators for the human mind. Okay, so how do we keep people engaged? We use sensory details. Use language that helps the audience or the listener feel, taste, see, smell, and hear as though they were actually in the middle of the action. Show rather than tell the story. Don't present just facts. Capitalize on a story conflict. A good story needs a conflict and a resolution to make sure you keep this audience in the story. Help the audience by adding a mystery or surprise to your story. Be expressive, but don't overuse gestures so that they're distracting. Make eye contact and use facial expressions to drive home your point. The A represents the audience and how to get and keep their attention. It may represent a call to action as well. Consider your audience when choosing your story. If your audience varies widely in age, background, and education, remember to focus on those basic emotional needs we talked about earlier. The freedom from fear, love, and happiness. Make sure that's the core of your story. You can get the listener's attention, and that is the utmost to get them involved in the story. Effective stories often start with a hook. It can be a surprising statement, some sort of conflict, or you may even use a question. You can sprinkle a few questions throughout your story so that it makes the listener think about what you're speaking about. Make sure you close with a message or a call to action, and that twist or unexpected event is also important. Connect with your audience by taking the focus off of yourself. Don't worry about how you appear, if they like you or if they don't like you. Think about your message and how important it is that you relay that message to the audience. Next, we have language and lessons. As mentioned in the E slide, use descriptive language to help set the stage and help the listener feel as though they're on this journey with you. Engage their senses by using colorful language. Instead of saying, "I went for a walk in my neighborhood yesterday," I can say, "As I walked out my door, I felt the warm sunshine on my cheek. The wind ruffled my hair. As I proceeded down the street, I could smell the sweet smell of the mock orange tree. Proceeding further, a little fuzzy bunny hopped in my path." You want to make sure that you take the listener on the journey with you. Use colorful and yet simple language. Make sure you're using language that the audience understands. And if you're using an acronym or something that's some concept that's a little more difficult, make sure you explain that so that they don't lose their focus. Leave the audience with a powerful lesson, a message, or action item. And now it's story time. We all live in a bubble. This bubble is our safety zone. I think this has come more into focus during COVID. So our bubble contains a lot of tiny other bubbles. Our family bubble, our community bubble, our home, our friends, our religious affiliation bubble, And even if we go to school, our school bubble, our work bubble, and we're safe and secure. Sometimes it's hard for us to see outside of this bubble and to see other people. Imagine, if you will, that you're sitting at your desk at work. Now, you're not working from home. You're actually working at your employer's office. You like your job, but you're hoping for some advancement, maybe to make some extra income for your family. And you're dreaming of a day when that might happen. When all of a sudden, your manager comes up behind you, taps you on the shoulder, and says, "I'd like to see you in my office." Oh boy, what did I do this time? Slowly, you get up and follow him into his office. Close the door and sit down across from him. Your manager says, "I love the work that you're doing. You and a few other individuals have been selected for a special assignment. We would like you to go abroad and work for a company that we've just made a contract with. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. You would go there for 3 years, and when you return, you'd be assured of a career advancement and a nice raise in salary." You get a little excited about this. This is what you were just dreaming about before he came to your desk. Can I think about this and go home and ask my significant other? Certainly, the boss says, but I'd like an answer by tomorrow because we'd like to start this process in a couple of weeks. So you go home and tell your significant other about this opportunity. "I'm in," they say. "Let's go." So you travel abroad. During your travel, you speak with some of the other people who have heard that this is a hostile environment, that these people in this other country don't really want you there. And they're cold and heartless. They don't have the same values, family values or otherwise, that we do. So expect to not be well received. You live in a place in an apartment building with all of the other people who have come with their families to this new land. And the first day at the new job, sure enough, you feel the cold shoulder. You don't feel like you're wanted or needed there. And you don't have much training, so you have to figure things out for yourself. It's a little frightening. After a few days, you get a call from someone who needs your assistance. I don't really know the screens that you're talking about, you tell them. She says, "What do you mean? Aren't you supporting this package?" "Yes, but I really haven't seen those screens." A real surprise happened. She invites you to her desk. You ask if you can bring a coworker. This is exciting. There's going to be a breakthrough here. So you go to her desk and work with her and find out just the information that you need to continue doing your job and doing it well. Over the next several weeks, the employee invites you often to her desk, and you have some conversations about not only business, but about family and personal things as well. You get to be really friendly. And then one day, this person from the other land asks you to come to dinner, you and your significant other, to come to dinner and maybe play a board game or so after. This is really exciting and not at all expected. When you go there, there's another surprise. She's invited other people that you work with that you haven't met before, but you've just talked to on the phone, and members of her family. You're presented with a wonderful, what they call Thanksgiving dinner. Gravy and stuffing and mashed potatoes and all kinds of sweet treats and delights. After dinner, you're invited to play a game of Mexican trained dominoes, which you've never played before. But it's a lot of fun. everyone ends the evening with a lot of laughter. You go away with a whole different perspective. After you have to return home, maybe a year and a half later, and you return back to this place, you find out that that employee's gone from her assignment. She's no longer working for the company. Her help, though, has really given you inspiration to do even a better job. When your 3 years are up, you contact this person and tell them that you're leaving. She again invites you into her home. You have another dinner, another game of Mexican train, and tell her a little story. When I came here, I heard that you were cold and heartless people. You inviting me into your home and showing me that you are the same at your core. You have the same love of family, the same love of fun, and an accepting nature made me feel very differently about this country and who you are. I bought some games of Mexican train. Our little community in our apartment building have tournaments, and I took a game home for my family. Now we all enjoy Mexican train, and I'm going to think of the days that I came here and spent with you. This is a true story. I am the person in the other country, and I invited someone home from India to learn like how we live and to enjoy their time away, their time spent here. It's so important that we look outside of our bubble, that we realize that other people have a bubble too, but that we take the time to venture outside and know that inside we are all the same. And maybe these bubbles inside really represent all of those emotional needs, the love, acceptance, family, happiness. Now I'd like to share my screen again. And this is the little storytelling quiz I talked about. So if you would use your reaction button to raise your hand and the moderator will call on you, let's discuss, was the story relatable? Did the story relate to the conference theme? And is the story timely? So please use your reaction button and the moderator, Emily, will call on you.
Gail?
Okay, I think, yes, the story was very relatable and relevant to the theme of diversity, because it was about mixing cultures. It was about Therese having gone to another country and experiencing, and actually the people from the other country were welcoming eventually, and the friend that she gained invited her to her home. So yes, it definitely relates to the theme, and I think it's timely, because I mean, any time is an appropriate time for this kind of story. Although today with COVID, it's a little harder to travel abroad, but I think people will be able to do so soon.
Thank you, Gail. Anyone else? Okay, we can move along to the next. Was the story engaging? Again, if you could use your reaction feature and raise your hand, the moderator will call on you. Anyone? Did it evoke any emotion? Did you feel as though you were in the story? Could you relate to being in the story?
Sharon?
Yes, I really felt like I was part of the story. I really felt your passion, and especially toward the end, you built up, and then uh, you added in the love, the acceptance, the family, the happiness, and that's really, those themes are very relatable, and they evoke emotion. And you were definitely expressive with your words throughout the presentation. You really, like I said, toward the end, that was really the peak of the story, but that's when it was the most expression and the most emotional. I feel like it was definitely educational. It was something we could all learn from, because, I could see from one point of view that there may be others that are thinking that, somebody else is going to take their job, and this might be a lesson to them that, it's very important to be accepting, because they're fearful and they're afraid and they just want to be accepted. So I thought it was definitely an educational message, and it was also entertaining. I was right there with you throughout your story.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. Anyone else?
Thumbs up from Bill. Bill, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I found the emotion also. I could very much feel when you were stressed about the negative response that was coming originally, that you thought would happen from the people who worked there, and then actually did. I could hear the distress, and I think that was another part that came out very strongly in the emotion, in feeling like, oh my gosh, what would I do?
Thank you, Bill. Okay, so we'll move on. We'll move on to the next. And did the story consider the audience, and how? If you could use your reaction button and raise your hand.
Sharon?
One thing that I definitely thought that stood out within your speech or your story was that you did say significant other, which is a way to inclusively include all people, no matter what their family status is, that you're just going to that other person, not necessarily saying husband or wife. So that definitely inclusive language.
Thank you, Sharon.
Annette?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, the famous. I enjoyed the visual of the bubble because it was certainly my own community of daily interaction. I mean, the bubble was so perfectly characteristic of our lives and who we keep close at hand, the comfort zone, our daily routines, etc. And Therese, I just can't believe you found that bubble. And that's it.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you. Anyone else before I move on? Okay, let's move to the language. Were the senses engaged? Was the language simple enough to understand? And were you left with a message? Anyone?
David?
Thank you very much, Toastmaster Therese. Yes, there's a key lessons here. And I think your message is not only relevant to the audience, but the lesson is learning to be inclusive with others. You mentioned in your story that you would have a preconceived notion that somewhere else is hostile to you. And I like the way how you hold the crystal ball. That is symbolic. Crystal ball means the future, right? Can you predict the future? What's going to happen in the future? I like the way how I was staring at a crystal ball or your glass structure, whatever you call it, the whole time in your storytelling, because I'm envisioning what's going to happen in the future. And the key lessons here is learn to take things from a different perspective. And that's what I learned from you today. Thank you, Therese.
Thank you very much. Anyone else before we move on?
Patricia?
I found the lesson of preconceived notions being dispelled was very refreshing. We all go into situations where we're very nervous. We don't know the people, and then you hear negative things about where the situation you're about to go into, and you get these preconceived notions, and they have preconceived notions about you. And if you can get past those, that is a fabulous lesson to learn. And for me, I love that lesson in this story. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we have a little time for questions. I'd just like to leave you with the thought. Remember, when you're telling a story, connect with the audience and take the focus off of yourself. Don't worry about how you're appearing or if you're nervous. Just think about how the story is going to impact the audience. Bring them in and make sure that you present in the most authentic ways possible. And now we have time for questions. And if you don't have a chance to ask your question, my email address, therese.imagine@gmail.com, is in the chat box. You can email me with any questions. So does anyone have a question for me?
We have a question from Judy.
How about adding humor? I invited people to dinner and I fed them things that were on their dietary restriction list. How about adding humor to your reel?
That's a really good suggestion. And humor is really an important thing that draws us all in, that makes us, it's one of those emotional needs that we have, and humor can really sort of diffuse a tense situation. So I like that. Thank you.
Susan, would you like to ask your question?
Teresa, do you offer any kind of coaching for people who want to develop their storytelling skills?
I would be very open to having you email me if you're interested in working with me with storytelling. And also anyone else who is on this session and is interested in getting my resource list to help them with story, I'm happy to send that to you. Just email me and I will send you my resources.
Annette?
Oh, you're on mute.
How about a Toastmaster storytelling group?
Was that an answer?
That would be it. No, it was Patty, I think, right, Patty? I think that'd be interesting to have a club focused on storytelling. That'd be amazing. I just want to make a comment rather than a question. I loved when you conjugated what a story is made up of, because as I've studied storytelling as well, and that's why I couldn't wait to get into this breakout, because I'm all about that word. What I find is that every story, whether it's a sitcom or a drama or a movie or a book of fiction, every single story has a damsel in distress of some kind, somebody who comes along and helps them, and adversity, like you explained. Yeah, well, adversity, it's something that causes adversity to the damsel in distress, and then the hero comes in. And I think that if we can focus on those three elements when we write our stories and really milk what people can relate to, especially the adversity, and then of course the relief at the end, I think that we are all future storytellers. And I thank you for conjugating that so well. I so related to it.
Thank you, Annette. I think if you tell a story where there isn't a conflict, you often lose the listener's attention, wandering off. That sort of on the edge of your seat, even if it's a minor conflict or some obstacle or hurdle that the main character has to get over, you keep the audience or the listener engaged. If you don't have that twist or that conflict in there, I think it's easy to have their mind wander. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay. So I just want to thank Anna Ho, our Zoom master, and Emily Zabo, our moderator. Oh, I do see another person with her hand raised.
Kathy?
Therese, I don't know that this is exactly a question, but I just wanted to commend you on your storytelling skill. One of my favorite things about a good presenter is being able to tell a story and to present it in a manner that is very down to earth, very more casual, but yet elegant, if that makes sense, and makes you feel like they're not speaking to you or lecturing to you, just that real emotional, casual bond that you have to connect to your audience. And I thought you did that very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks again to Anna and Emily. And don't forget to fill out the evaluation form at the end and email me if you would like either my resource list or to talk more about the session, or you have any more questions. I would love to hear from you. And lastly, I want to wish you happy storytelling.
Thank you so much, Therese. Our audience, feel free to unmute yourself and just applaud Therese for such a great session. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.